We know a type of change is going to happen, is happening. The key question is, what can we do to get ourselves ready for that change?
It could be incredibly disruptive. It could be the most disruptive event food and drinks ever experienced.
The GLP-1 market hit 50 billion last year. It's forecast to be 150 billion by 2030.
No matter which category you're in at the moment, you need to be firstly fully aware of GLP. You need to be tracking it. You need to be understanding how your consumers are evolving and adopting it, because that will be what will set you apart.
But what if that, for consumers on GLP-1s, that emotional connection just is not there?
You cannot differentiate on functional benefits, but we are emotionally driven beings. We're not just functional.
They're taken for diabetes. This wasn't to lose weight, this drug. It was to treat diabetes, and that's why people were taking it long term. I think the snacking area is what will take a massive hit. People don't want to snack anymore.
It's very easy to sort of paint a brush strokes of saying it needs to be high protein, it needs to be this, it needs to be that. But actually what's really important is making sure that if people aren't eating as much, every single bite matters.
Hello everyone, welcome back to YMCPG, the podcast that cuts through the noise and makes sense of the biggest shifts reshaping our industry. Big topic, and we've got some incredible people to help us unpack this. If I could just quickly introduce them. Rob Hobson, registered nutritionist, 3 degrees in nutrition, 20 years in the field, and the author of the Low Appetite Cookbook. If anyone can explain what GLP-1s do to our brains and body, it's Rob. Johnny Forsyth, global food and drink analyst at Mintel for 17 years. If you've read a headline about a big consumer shift, chances are Johnny was quoted in it with some data behind him. Jennifer Dine, former general manager of Unilever's UK and Ireland ice cream business and over 17 years of experience within CPG, our client insider. She knows how brands will need to change in the face of an indulgence evolution. And finally, Caroline Withers, an R&D leader from Carlsberg Britvic with a PhD in centering consumer science and over 15 years of experience exploring new products for consumers. She'll help us understand what can and needs to be reformulated for a world where desire could look very different. Welcome, everyone. I'll stop wittering on. Let's dive in. Now, this isn't a medical podcast, right? It's a brand podcast. And the big question we're going to try and answer today is, how should food and drink brands respond to GLP-1s before ultimately they respond to the brands? Rob, let's start with you. Let's start with the basics. For those who aren't familiar, they may have seen the headlines, but what exactly are GLP-1s and what do they do to the brain and the body?
Yeah, so GLP-1 is glucagon-like peptide 1. So it's a hormone that your body produces when you eat. It's produced in the gut, and that signals to your brain that you've eaten, and that then signals satiety, so you feel full. Another thing that this hormone does is it slows down the passage of food through your gut, so you feel fuller for longer. And then on top of that, it also increases insulin and reduces a hormone called glucagon, which helps to balance your blood sugar. So what these drugs do is they kind of amplify that effect. So people are going to feel much more fuller more quickly. They're going to feel much more fuller for longer. And obviously this blood sugar element is going to help towards appetite cravings, that kind of thing as well.
And talk to me about just from a kind of real consumer perspective. So, instead of having a big bowl of pasta and thinking, oh, I'll have a chocolate digestive with my cup of tea, what's happening to the people on these drugs?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things you'll hear is the food noise. So that continual chatter in your head about food kind of disappears. It gives people the freedom then to sort of make healthier choices or live their life in a different way in terms of food without constantly thinking about food, passing the fridge, thinking about what's in there, passing a bakery and trying to go past it without craving or wanting something. So yeah, your cravings are reduced. And it makes a significant difference to people's life, but it can be quite weird if you have lived your life with this chatter and you've sought out comfort in those foods. To suddenly have it disappear can also be a little bit disorientating. So I think it does take a bit of getting used to, and I think this is where you also need a bit of support to help you to fill the gaps. So what am I going to do now if I haven't got food to give me that comfort? Or I'm very sociable and I like going out, and no longer I have that element of my life. So
yeah, you're right.
It raises a lot of questions.
The ramifications of not eating very much is very widespread, isn't it? It runs across so much of of society and culture. And we'll get onto that. I think that's a very interesting point, and some of the implications are big. Johnny, so if appetite, changes from a neurological level, actually kind of hacks your mind in thinking that you're full. We top line some numbers at the start. What's the data saying about adoption? How quickly is this going to get very, very big?
So what our data shows is that US is far ahead of all the other markets. But even in the US, it's just 12% of adults are on it at the moment. That's still 30 million people.
Still quite big, 30 million people.
Still quite big, quite quickly. But you've got to understand that the US is a completely different market to Europe. So US is much more commercially and consumer-led in terms of healthcare, whereas Europe's much more regulatory and government-led. So the rollout in Europe's going to be much slower. And our data shows that actually 8% of UK adults are currently taking GLP-1. It's probably slightly below that for the rest of Europe. And a lot of people are quite skeptical about it, particularly older people who, ironically, are the people who probably need it the most because they're more likely to be obese and they're more likely to get chronic disease as a result of that obesity.
But I guess for context, and I guess everything's relative in terms of size, isn't it? And 12% of US adults is pretty big. You've got 2 to 4 million people potentially on it in the UK, with that number growing. And I guess it's what they're not doing, which is going to have the impact. I think it's impacting food spend significantly. I think it was 6% a week. So I think there are some potential implications that we need to look at as this grows, however slowly it might grow. And I guess for context as well, some of those numbers that we talked about at the beginning, that's bigger globally than plant-based ever got. It's faster than protein has grown. And potentially you look at something like sugar tax and how brands have had to adapt. It's probably bigger than that. So the size and the scale and the pace of this is potentially pretty disruptive, isn't it?
Oh, it could be incredibly disruptive. It could be the most disruptive event, food and drinks ever experienced, but it's a big if, there's a lot of things that will need to work for that to happen. And I think it's worth clients knowing that, at the moment it's small and certainly in Europe, the rollout will be slow. It's not something that's going to happen really, really quickly.
And I think that's what's confusing. There's headlines about it every day, mainstream media, isn't there? We've seen everything from celebrity endorsements, talk about that earlier, the potential of pills replacing the injections. What's that going to do for growth? There's even a claim GLP-1s might even help dementia and things like that. So there's a lot of stuff going on. I actually read over the weekend that Heston Blumenthal says he's re-engineering the menu at the Fat Duck, really big piece of information there. And he kindly said, it will be at a higher price point, even though you get less food. But I guess what's real and what's the hype? Rob, from a nutrition perspective, what should we be paying attention to?
Yeah, I think what's really, if you look at the research, first of all, you mentioned that stuff around dementia. There's a lot of stuff coming out in the press about these sort of miracle cures related to the drug. We don't have a lot of research behind any of that. It's all kind of hypothesis building. Yeah. I think what we do have is the research to show that if you lose a significant amount of weight, all the health benefits that are amazing. And that really changes quality of life from, your blood pressure, your joints, your sleep apnea for people who are obese, all that kind of stuff. It's really beneficial. We've also got really strong research around cardiovascular health. So being able to reduce the risk of heart attack and stroke, I think that's really interesting as well. So from that perspective, the press loves a miracle cure and they always have. So I think you have to take that stuff with a pinch of salt until we get more research. I think the conversation around certain celebrities like Serena is really interesting. She came out and she said she really struggled to lose the weight after she had a baby and she's doing everything she normally does and she just couldn't shift that weight. So she turned to the drugs and they work for her and that's great. And I think now she's working with the company, might be Roe, I think is the health tech company, as an ambassador. But it raises loads of questions like, is she sort of normalizing the drug to take away the stigma, or is she kind of normalizing a dependency on that drug to turn it into something that's aesthetic, which is just losing a few pounds when you need to. And I think that, we've got to be really careful about the messaging that gets out there.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people that are taking this drug, it's not a matter of aesthetics. They're not interested that much in being thin. What they're interested in is not dying from obesity and the related diseases. So it's a case of quality of life and disease prevention than just trying to get into a summer-ready body. And I'm not saying Serena's doing that because she lost a lot of weight. And I think that conversation is really complicated and nuanced. But I think that conversation still exists.
Also, it's not like she's just a TV personality. She's arguably the best female athlete in the world, or previously the best female athlete in the world, incredibly active individual. And so I think that's potentially where it gets really muddy, is what about sport and fitness and being active and then taking it to shift a few pounds. It is a very complex and nuanced conversation from a consumer perspective.
But I think it also shows how weight loss is really complicated. And even if you are somebody that's had no problem maintaining that weight at that point in time, then you're really, really struggling. I mean, I think it's just not an easy thing to do, to lose weight for a lot of people. And this idea of calories in, calories out doesn't really work for a lot of people. So it's a broad conversation. I don't know where I sit on it, whether I think, yes, I think they're great, or whether I think people should really take them only if they're recommended to, and then go back to a dietary lifestyle approach. It's tricky.
Yeah. I mean, there's no such thing as a silver bullet, but it's Absolutely being positioned as a silver bullet. And I think that's where the growth, I think, will come from.
I think just to build on that, I think the big question is why people are taking it. If your why is for health reasons, that's a very different motivator than the lifestyle reasons. And I think the growth rate will be strongly determined also by what's driving it. Right now, it feels smaller than it is, although sizable, because it's being driven by the health agenda and the nutritional benefits of that and the health benefits of that. But the moment it becomes mass, lifestyle, culture changing, that's a very different market dynamic that brands and businesses will need to prepare for.
I think it is been driven at the moment by the lifestyle, though, because if I look at the data in the UK, younger people, so 18 to 34-year-olds, are twice as likely as normal people to be on GLP-1, but also they're statistically much less likely to be obese. So when you look at why younger people lose weight, it's completely different to older people. It's less about health, although that is a factor. It actually is a lot about looks and, a lot about kind of getting that beach body and things like that. I think it is actually been driven by the lifestyle at the moment. Yeah,
it's seen as sort of like a lifestyle accessory, but I mean, how are they affording it? And how much percentage of their income are they willing to spend on being thin, essentially?
They're still living with their parents.
Exactly. But that's really scary. Like that has become, the treatments that they spend a lot of their money on, and now they're going into this, looking for this drug to be thin. When we've just come away from all of that, I think it's...
it's price-wise, 1,400 quid a month. Wegovy, wasn't it? I saw yesterday, that's... a place to rent, that's a mortgage.
It's a chunk of cash.
It's a huge amount of money, isn't it? And particularly when you look at younger consumers not having the disposable income that previous generations has had. Caroline, let's just talk about the kind of change in which people feel about food and the emotional connection that people feel about food, which has very big implications on the food and drink industry.
Absolutely. I mean, building on Rob's point brilliantly about that food noise, that is massive as a shift. It's not just people having that sort of almost no more talk in their heads when they walk past a bakery, but it's also in their minds when they are going shopping. It is in they're making those decisions of what product to put in their baskets as well. So it impacts on a lot of their decision making. They also have a tricky balance to hit as well, because you've got families where you might have one on a GLP-1 and the rest of the family not. So how do you then make those decisions that suits, say, the purchaser who might be on the GLP-1 to fit with the rest of the family and make sure everybody feels like they're getting a satisfying experience? But also crucially, food is still about connection. People self-identify as foodies. I don't know many things where you'd say, I am my own worst habit. But it's because people absolutely love food. And it means that food needs to stand for more, and there needs to be more emotional connection to the food people do take. And that puts a real high bar on the food industry and food and drink. But actually, it's a high bar I hope we can all rise to and surpass, to really give consumers the choices that they're looking for when they do have this challenging balance to set up.
I couldn't agree more. I think food is inherent to the human condition, both physically and emotionally. If you think about how we connect, it's over meals. If you think about those family meal occasions, birthday celebrations, going out with your friends, food is so central to the heart of bringing people together, and we are social creatures. We need those emotional connections. Now, the question is if you're eating a lot less volume, are those occasions becoming shorter? Or are you still going to connect in that emotional way, but just change what you're eating or consuming in that moment? Because consumers are still wanting to connect. And food brings joy. It brings comfort, to Rob's point earlier. There's many good things that food brings. And what's really important is that businesses don't rush off and focus fully on functional benefits, when actually it's the emotional connection behind foods and beverages that make the world of difference. You cannot differentiate on functional benefits. You can differentiate on your emotional connection that people have with your brands.
But I get that. But I think potentially that's something that the industry has done for years and years and years, dined off emotional benefits massively. But what if that for consumers on GLP-1s, that emotional connection just is not there, right? So we talk about comfort and joy and pleasure and desire and all those great things. Listen, I've been in marketing for a long time. I know those words. But what if, from a scientific point of view, neurologically, those emotional connections with food are not there?
I think that was a question for Rob in a way. Does it mean that people are not getting the same enjoyment in food? Are they going to look at food as more just
functional? I think you kind of do. I mean, you dampen down the reward centers in your brain. That's what this drug does. So you can lose the joy and motivation to eat. And that is one of the biggest problems. That's what differentiates GLP from low appetite is GLP. A lot of people are really happy that they're not eating anymore. It's the one time in their life where they're not snacking, overly grazing. So they're actually quite happy to not be eating that much. Whereas low appetite, if you've lost a lot of weight, trying to build your appetite back up, it's all about trying to introduce people to food and you want that comfort and the joy. You can get that with them, but you can't with GLP-1. So I think you almost have to come in on an educational angle of you have to keep eating because there are nutritional things that you need to keep in your diet: protein, fiber, micronutrients. So it's more, and it would be the same with snacking actually. I think the snacking area is what will take a massive hit. People don't want to snack anymore on GLP-1s. So, that grazing is gone. So it's more like intentional snacking. So it's educating people, you need protein. Well, then let's get a protein snack. I mean, just to say here, I am actually food first, but I do think then there's a role for food products. So, you have, a high fiber snack, high protein snack.
But that's snacking still.
It is, but it's more intentional mini meals. I think you need to move into this kind of nutrient dense mini meals as opposed to a meal or a snack, because that's kind of how we're going to be looking at this and the way that people are probably going to be eating.
So a move away from 3 square meals a day.
Probably, yeah. 3 square meals that are big, that could go, little bits of snacks in between those meals. It could be more smaller, nutrient dense offerings that hit the mark.
Sounds pretty functional, right?
I think it is functional, to be honest.
To be honest, we've seen that trend already change. So the 3 set meals don't happen as often as they used to be. You're often snacking on the go. It's about a frequency, smaller portion. Those trends are already established in busy lives today. I think there's a difference between people being driven by a functional, I'm hungry and I need to keep myself going, I need to fuel my body, versus an emotional moment. And I would challenge the hypothesis that if you eat less food, you're not going to have any connection to food, because I still believe very strongly that your emotional connection with food is very driven strongly by who you're doing it with. But at the same time, on a Friday night after a long week, you do need a little reward. You might not need a giant tub of ice cream, but you will want a little treat because that's being driven by an emotional desire. It's an emotional moment of indulgence. Now, that frequency might drop. I completely agree. But we are emotionally driven beings. We're not just functional. And we've seen many trends that are functionally driven come up, they come into the market, they surge, and then they stabilize, because consumer habits, occasions take years to change and evolve structurally. Doesn't mean you don't have a massive disruption when it comes, but I still believe very strongly that consumers will still have an emotional connection and driver and trigger to food and to beverages.
I guess the other thing is, if you were a foodie to start with and you enjoyed food, you're not going to not appreciate a decent bowl of food. So
Yes.
while it might be functional because you know that you have to eat to feed yourself, you're still going to appreciate what that food looks like and what that food tastes like. And I think this is another question for the food industry, is to make sure that when you're producing this food, it looks great. It doesn't look like diet food. It doesn't look like kids' food. So people have an eaten occasion, like you said, where they can think, I'm eating a really lovely, I might not be that hungry or for all of it, but at least I know it's a lovely bit of food. It's made really well. It's packaged really well. It looks great on the plate. So I think that's where I'm coming from. Functional from, you need to, but you still need all those elements if you're going to make it.
Soul food.
Soul food, yeah.
Well, where I can see it going is people moving away from indulgent snacks to healthier snacking, because already we know that consumers want to get to that place, but they can't. There's a good gap between their attitude and their behavior. And actually, I think, brands like Little Moons kind of targeting this treat, but it's a more portion controlled, slightly less sweet, more kind of adult treat. I can see it, the pendulum definitely shifting more in that direction.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. But, Jennifer, to the point you made earlier, you've run one of the biggest ice cream brands in the world. And a brand like Magnum has positioned itself around pleasure and indulgence and for years and years and years, and has done a fantastic job of it. What does this all mean for a brand like that?
I think that all premium indulgent brands will be in a position now where they're going to be looking at having a reactive strategy as well as a revolutionary strategy. They're going to make sure that they're able to evolve with consumers' needs as they're going along through innovation, through pack format, through flavor, whatever they need to do to evolve, that will happen under the bonnet, as they say. But at the same time, the big brands have the ability through their marketing and brand investments to actually form and shape the narrative on what future indulgence looks like. And the fact that pleasure and indulgence should be guilt-free. And it doesn't have to be a full portion. It could be a smaller portion. Magnum bite-sized bonbons is another example of those bite-sized ice cream portions where you're still rewarding yourself. You're still responding to that emotional trigger, but in a way that's relevant from a portion control size, which makes you feel guilt-free. So there's still going to be that response to that. But I think big brands, big businesses will not only react to the trend, but they will also start to proactively communicate and help inform what the future of indulgence should look like going forward.
Just to jump here, I think something that we need to sort of set to the food industry and to be aware of is not to just go wholeheartedly down the functional food option, which is what it looks like on paper. On paper, you hear all these factors, some of the side effects that people have to deal with on GLP-1s. The natural thing is for the food industry to want to help solve that and provide protein and everything. But actually, to fit into that sort of dual purpose, both functional, both beneficial and indulgent at the same time, is a very, very difficult ask. And not every consumer is going to want that ask. So actually providing choice for those small indulgent moments that I would definitely have on a Friday night too, Jen, is absolutely perfect to help give those elements of choice for consumers.
And also we're seeing, and Rob, jump in, we're seeing it's temporary, right? It's you use the word yo-yo earlier. People are on the drugs. They have 30, 40, 50% fewer calories a day, we're seeing. I mean, that's an extraordinary amount. And I think even some of the cases are even more than that. But it's for a temporary program, and then they come off the drug, and then it's, I guess, what then happens?
Yeah, I mean, I think that statistic is more around 30. If you look at the science, I think it actually sits comfortably around a third less. And I mean, when people come off the drugs, the hunger hormones kick in, you food passes more quickly through your stomach. You get the food noise back. It is a real challenge, but I think there are people who, it's an opportunity for some people, and some people do when they're on the drugs, to try and change their behavior, but reset their behaviors a little bit. They're like, wow, I've got an opportunity here where I'm not constantly thinking about food, and they might do whatever it is they've got to do, understand better portion sizing, think about how to put a plate of food together that's a bit more nourishing. Not for everybody, but I think for some people. The problem is if you're doing these drugs privately, you don't have any of that information available to you. Yeah. If you're doing it through the NHS, you're going on a weight management program where all of this is part of the program. And I think this is probably quite a good area that the food industry could tap into as well, is also giving people that information alongside the food that they're producing, this sort of nutrient-dense, low appetite food. We saw it with probiotic companies, yogurts and stuff. They owned that market space in teaching us about our gut microbiomes. And I think that there is an opportunity there for, this is what it looks like when you're eating with a low appetite. And it's actually not that easy. We were talking about portion sizes earlier, but even trying to figure out what a portion size looks like, because people can be on different levels of the drugs. So if you're on a very strong level at the start, you might only be eating 800 calories. In between that, it could be 12 to 1600 calories. You could be a guy on this drug on a dose and still be getting close to 1800 calories a day. There are people that are still going to train on these drugs and need a bit more food and a bit more support. So really trying to figure out exactly what a portion looks like is also part of the challenge. You can do that through the stuff that I do with nutrition, teaching people about, the bariatric plate. This amount of your plate is this and a quarter is that. But from a food production development side, I think that's a real challenge, right? What does it look like?
One of the reasons I was slightly skeptical, though, about whether GLP-1 will be as disruptive as people think is at the moment you've got to be on these drugs for life, because you come off them, you just put the weight back on. And really, are there going to be that many people on these drugs for life?
Not if they're paying for them themselves.
It's not just the payment. These drugs have real side effects, which are quite unpleasant. That's why a lot of people are coming off them. So I think there's still a lot that could prevent this from being as dramatic as it could be.
Yeah, and it hasn't quite gone on for long enough to understand, particularly in the US, where you've got this huge number of people on it. What happens 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the line?
Exactly.
But you could just have a steady flow of people on it. So the bench is set and then it just continues to stay there because people are coming off, people are coming on. But I think maybe the people that would stay on them for life are the ones that actually need them, which is why this drug was there in the first place, right?
Yes.
So, and it'd be like taking a statin or, they're taken for diabetes. This wasn't to lose weight, this drug. It was to treat diabetes. And that's why people were taking it long term. So you need to not forget that side of it.
Yes.
This wasn't a weight loss drug.
No. And it's difficult to manage for brands if you think about it in that kind of fragmented, segmented consumer world where people are coming on and coming off and habits are changing and new people, you would think a very, very kind of tight portfolio strategy to meet some of those needs would be needed. And we were already seeing brands respond, and launches happen. Nestle launching Vital Pursuits, directly going after GLP-1 users, Huel even pushing into greens and protein-dense formats, moving away from their kind of creamy liquid from an innovation perspective, acquisitions from Danone in the space. So moves have been made and businesses have started to really spend money to try and get ahead in the space. Jen, when you look at a broader category like confectionery, what do you think are some of the biggest disruptions that we're going to see at a category level, and not just kind of smaller sizes and nutritionally dense foods and things like that? Do you see Mondelez, Cadbury's starting to completely rethink how they do portfolio, how they change their business to adapt to not just the drugs, but actually a more kind of potentially healthier, low appetite lifestyle?
I think they will have to prepare for it. Whether they launch it is a different question. I think all businesses, no matter which category you're in at the moment, you need to be firstly fully aware of GLP. You need to be tracking it. You need to be understanding how your consumers are evolving and adopting it, because that will be what will set you apart. You'll see two behaviors in the market and in all the categories. You'll have first mover advantage. Some brands will launch really early, test and learn, be really bold, try and understand how they can optimize it and leverage it, which is great for the short term. But if you launch too early, you're too niche. If you launch too late, people have already switched brands. And so you need to make sure that you are tightly engaged with your consumers and understanding your heavy users and, most importantly, your light users. Your heavy ones are the ones who will be loyal. They'll stick to your brand. They've got that strong emotional bond with your brand. But to your point, you still need to make sure you're relevant and have a portfolio strategy that meets their needs. But for the light users, the ones who are dipping in and out, if you lose significant volume there from a business point of view, it can be very, very challenging.
Yeah.
So you need to be able to prepare for that and respond. And your response can be both through a portfolio, can be through mergers and acquisitions, can also be around bringing in-house capabilities, capabilities from other businesses, from pharma, from health, nutrition, who understand how to strengthen your in-house capabilities from a scientific point of view as well.
Does that mean having a pipeline ready to go?
Yes. And when you see the scale of your consumers that have moved, you've decided already 2 years in advance, if this adoption rate amongst my light and medium users is at 10, 20%, I launch this project or I launch this product. But you proactively be prepared for it.
Are you briefing marketing or are you briefing R&D?
R&D.
Caroline?
Over to you.
Thanks. I will just go and create.
Solve it.
I suppose a question back to you then, Jen, is how, given the sort of personal nature of this particular challenge, but we always find this challenging in the sort of more diet level industry. Obviously, for those who are really seeking those health benefits, they probably are more open. But how do you tap into knowing what your like consumers, for example, who are dipping in and out, are looking for, and sort of tailoring that strategy to match it?
It's really interesting because what we're seeing now in the market is with AI, the ability to talk to consumers with scale on a daily basis is becoming a very, very powerful tool. So businesses are now able to engage with consumers daily, ask questions, prod them, have qualitative conversations facilitated fully through an AI tech platforms. And so the conversation and the challenge I would have to marketeers and business leaders is you should be speaking to your consumers daily and weekly. Gone are the days where you could only have a qualitative research focus group every 6 months to a year in case you had a good idea. The pace of consumer change and the way that habits are evolving with speed means you need to proactively engage. So if you're not fully engaging with your consumers, if you're not tracking them, if you're not engaging with them, if you're not keeping up to date with their habits, you will launch and you will be too late.
And Jen, this is music to my ears because from an R&D perspective, we want to understand what consumers need at the very start of doing any changes. If we're going to develop a whole new platform, for example, of new drinks, new developments in our area, we need to know that that's rooted in a real consumer need, but also a real consumer understanding of what that could be. So obviously, it's amazing what technologies we have in my wonderful lab team have magically making potions back in the office. But if there isn't that consumer understanding and that consumer need, it's all wasted, that work. And actually, this GLP-1 situation really helps bring it to the fore and really helps showcase what exactly we need to focus on and how we can develop products that really delight consumers.
And just talking about that then, specifically from a product and R&D perspective, how are GLP-1s changing the actual product kind of consumption experience? I've read a lot about a move away from chocolatey, creamy kind of textures and tastes into fresher, lighter, flavorful taste. Is that true? Is that what you're seeing as well?
I think it's multidimensional, but absolutely it is a general shift. So I'm sure this is where Rob can add his nutrition lens, but really consumers are typically looking for those lighter flavors, lighter touches, because that heavy, rich, creamy characters can just be too much on their sort of more delicate systems. You don't want to be triggering nausea. You don't want to be triggering sort of any of those side effects. So you want to make sure you're supporting people, and the sensory experience of those products is fundamentally important. Not just to say this food is going to support you and give you the nutrition you need and that sort of halo, but also to say what the brand is trying to stand for and make people feel like they're really enjoying that moment. I think it's very easy to sort of paint a brush strokes of saying it needs to be high protein, it needs to be this, it needs to be that. But actually what's really important is making sure that if people aren't eating as much, every single bite matters. And every single product experience, it has to deliver to them.
I agree, but it doesn't become a health halo if you're producing food that generally stands up to the claim and it is nutritious. I think one of the problems we have with any product that falls into this, if the food industry makes this a niche that becomes a diet, then we're going to end up with an influx of foods that are produced quite cheaply. So the protein is going to become a protein isolate to reduce the bulk. The fiber is going to become whatever it is, inulin. We'll get added vitamins and minerals, emulsifiers to change the mouthfeel of the product to make it more. Do you see what I mean? And I think that's one of the risks we have with this becoming a GLP category of food, is we end up with a load of ultra-processed foods. When what you need, I don't know, there's companies like Bowl Foods, for example, they do those nice little high protein pots with all the vegetables and everything else, the fiber, that kind of thing. I think more products like that are probably what we need more than essentially diet products.
One of the challenges though is consumers don't have a good understanding of what is a nutritional meal. So the high protein claim, for example, well, we over consume protein. We don't need more protein. We actually need more fiber, but fiber is not as big a claim. So I think that's one of the challenges, that kind of education piece.
Yeah.
But that comes into, like I said, you can be part of that narrative as the food industry to help to educate people with the right information instead of them going to social media and figuring out, or TikTok, which is where most people get their nutrition information from, to figure out how to make it work. I don't think people really access the government websites and stuff every day. They don't go to the NHS website or anything else to find their information. So I think there's an opportunity there to help people to understand, because they don't even know what they're looking for to start with, right? So,
and that's where you've got sensory sort of signposts. You can give people product experiences that ladder up to both, oh, I'm feeling pretty comfortable having eaten this thing, I feel satisfied, all those wonderful things. And then the messaging and the sort of information behind it to say why that is the case. People shop with their eyes, they shop with packaging. They don't, even if the food and drink industry sat and gave out all this information, getting that through to a consumer's behavior patterns is very difficult.
I think also, just to build on that, I think making nutritious food accessible is also really important.
It's really important.
And I think this isn't just about branded players. It's also got to do with private label manufacturers and retailers who also have a responsibility to provide the right type of nutritious meals for their consumers at an accessible price point.
Otherwise it becomes a luxury, right? Just becomes another privileged area. But, outside of that, there's an opportunity, these foods also, to go into the sector of catering companies, hospitals, NHS, discounted food to people that are on GLP-1s. The scope is really big for this whole low appetite eating area.
Yes.
And it doesn't just have to be around fancy food products.
So what's going to happen in the short term is brands are going to look at their portfolio and go, okay, what works for GLP-1 users, right? What have we got already that fits? And they're likely to put a stamp on it that says GLP-1 user friendly. That's likely to happen. You're starting to see that already. And then clearly there's going to need to be some big work behind the scenes to go, okay, evolution of this looks like what, both from a brand and an R&D perspective. My question is this though, is R&D takes a long time. There's trials and there's years of work that needs to go on behind the scenes. Isn't it all going to happen too late? What are you guys working on it now? Because actually stuff is shifting really, really fast. Growth rates are pretty big. Consumer habits are changing. What needs to happen now? What needs to happen tomorrow to get businesses like Carlsberg, Britvic, like Danone, like PepsiCo, Kraft Heinz, all these brilliant CPG companies, what needs to happen now to get them ready?
So actually, we are all working on it. I'm absolutely sure that full list of brands you just mentioned are all working on this. And where we're focusing our energies on is on that hydration space. Is a lot of previous sort of diet cultures has focused very much on what people eat, and that's where all the energy has been going. But actually, what a lot of the GLP-1 communication is about hydration, water, getting more water in, and that's helping towards some of that longevity of what happens for those yo-yo dieters coming off the drug. If they can keep maintaining hydration, that can help. And absolutely, we're looking constantly at ways of making hydrating options more accessible to everyone. And that I know there is obviously water coming out of the tap. I know anyone can grab a glass of water pretty much, or at least we are all in that privileged situation. But it's about giving people choices and giving people accessible hydration. And our teams are constantly working on how to improve that for consumers across our portfolio, across the different areas. And things like when you ask me about the flavors, it's things like bringing some more complexity to our flavors. It's about bringing things like botanicals. It's about mixing both function with real flavor execution and delivery. We know that GLP-1 users are less likely to want a very fizzy or very carbonated product. So we're looking at ones that are less carbonated or are more subtle, that are more sophisticated. Those things are already being developed or already out there, but they're just gaining momentum. And I know that people like Danone, people other businesses are working incredibly hard to do the same sort of paths. And like Jen said, work out different channels.
And just a point on drinking there, because it's an interesting implication. You talked about consumers maybe not wanting fizzy carbonated drinks. Is that a good description of beer?
Absolutely.
You work for Carlsberg Britvic?
I do indeed. And actually, this is where it really gives us an opportunity, because yes, beer consumption varies, it fluctuates a lot. And a lot of it goes back to that social moment that Jen and I were talking about earlier. It's all about tied in with some of those much more social gatherings. And it's about making those experiences matter. And that's where beer, soft drinks, and non-alcoholic beers really still provide an opportunity for consumers. Maybe the volumes won't be the same and people will be more discerning about the beers they select. And this is why choice really matters. But absolutely, we see this from our side as much more of an opportunity, rather than sitting there thinking, oh my goodness, panic stations.
Definitely. I mean, it follows a similar trajectory, doesn't it, as the kind of evolution of the non-alc movement and in general moderation. Consumers want brilliant experiences and brilliant drinks that just happen to be non-alcoholic. And it's a kind of taste first desire. And I think that's what we're agreeing with here, is whatever this becomes is a taste first desire. However small, however nutritionally dense, it is a taste first play. And yeah, I think brands, the opportunity is great food experiences, smaller, better, delivers a sort of maybe a micro indulgence hit. Jen,
could I just make a couple of points as well? One is that you can't, from a regulatory perspective, say GLP friendly on pack. Can't make that claim. Can in the US, you can't in Europe.
At the moment.
Secondly, why would you want to make that claim? Because you're basically corralling yourself into potentially quite a niche segment. And, consumers, there is a stigma for a lot of consumers around GLP-1. Would they want to be seen buying that in a supermarket? Would they want to identify themselves with that label? I doubt it. I think the bigger opportunity is around kind of creating more positive, kind of enjoyable, diet-friendly foods. So claims like high satiety or potentially high protein and fiber, more positive claims rather than the calorie counting that we saw in the 90s, which is very reductive.
And Rob, just last point about drinking. What does it do from a consumer perspective? What are we starting to see consumers on GLP-1s? What does it do for their alcohol consumption? Does it put people off, or does it make no impact?
They don't want to drink as much. And in the majority, I think that's probably what you found from working with your company. The alcohol just tastes harsher. And it's the same, not just with alcohol. Coffee might give you heartburn, or the fizzy drinks just are not very palatable anymore. So I think that it's looking for different solutions that are, like you said, you're working with botanicals, smaller serving sizes, all that kind of stuff that still gives people that experience, which is really great. And making this, like everything with this food, it needs to be aspirational, not feel like you're somehow having to, what's the word I'm looking for?
Compromise.
Yes, that you're having to compromise because you're having less of it. And I think that That's really important.
I think if I was an alcohol producer, I would be really, really worried because there's already kind of consumers have a lot of good reason to give up on alcohol. It's not as trendy amongst young people as it was. They're drinking less. It's really expensive in a cost of living crisis. People are much more health conscious now. So if they get another reason to give up, that's potentially taking a lot of people out of the market.
Yeah.
I think it's about presenting beer and alcoholic drinks in a slightly different way than perhaps we have before. There's been very much the sort of, at least in the UK, the pub culture, that I'm going to go and watch the football in the pub with my mates, that kind of style. And I think where this could pivot towards is much more about tailoring together food and drink as a whole, rather than seeing it's two separate things. You have a pint and a burger, and they're two separate entities. And actually, it's about collaborating and combining those experiences to make every aspect of that meal have a value, have a real enjoyment factor, to go to that emotional zone, but also to give the functional filling needs that people have. So it's that balance and trade-off. And I think, yes, we might have smaller portions. We might have flights of beer, for example, rather than big pints or pitchers. And I think that's where this mentality with consumers will transition. And that's where we have to keep up with it. And that's kind of how I see it.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's huge opportunity, right? Huge opportunity from a drinking perspective to cater for new needs, new desires. We've actually got a podcast on that in a couple of weeks' time, a kind of social beverages, future of drinks podcast. So a lot of that will play into there. Just moving slightly towards, in a similar way, sort of socializing and restaurants. And we joked about Heston Blumenthal and the Fat Duck, and maybe that's probably an extreme. But yeah, what does this mean for hospitality? What does this mean for portion sizes, obviously, at restaurants? And is there going to be different menus? And obviously experience is still very, very important, but are you going to go and want to spend 40, 50 quid if you're only going to get a bite of something? What's it going to do to that world, do you think?
You can find restaurants where you can go and eat if you're on GLP-1s. A lot of restaurants have moved to small plates. You can order to a starter. There's ways to manage that. But I think for me, probably restaurants need to maybe introduce another serving size that isn't a bit condescending. It's just I don't know how you would name it. I don't know what it is, but at the moment you've got adults and kids, you've got starters and mains. So maybe we just need to introduce something a bit different.
Like the light bite section.
Yeah, definitely. And also maybe as a consumer, you need to not be embarrassed with GLP-1s of asking to take food away with you, or, change that way that you behave in a restaurant as well if they don't have the right portion size for you. So I think there's lots of different angles to it. I think the thing with Heston Blumenthal is absolutely ridiculous. I'm sorry, but you're not going to turn it into this luxury way of eating and charging more money for it when all it is whole foods. Which is what it produces anyway. I mean, that to me, that's just crazy. And I don't think any of this should come with a cost tag like that, a hefty cost tag.
I guess that just reflects that at the moment, it's people who are very affluent who are on these drugs. So therefore, the premiumization strategy is the kind of obvious route to go.
Yeah.
Like Vital Pursuits by Nestle, it's like 60% more expensive than the biggest competitor in the market, because you can't afford to be on these drugs unless you're earning a lot of money.
And that gets into a pretty big question about wealth and health, doesn't it? That you would say, Rob, has influenced culture for forever.
Yeah, totally. It's not just about these drugs. These drugs have introduced a association with wealth that comes with taking these drugs, but food has always been associated with wealth and luxury. Some people can afford better food. That comes often with better nutrition and a better lifestyle. Some people sit in the middle somewhere. Then the people on lower incomes often end up turning to ultra-processed foods. The irony being with the drugs that the people that really need them are generally the people that don't have a lot of money, because those people often have high rates of obesity. So there is this sort of inequality, and it's just going to broaden, people that if thinness becomes a thing that's associated with wealth and desired by wealthy people, then that inequality is just going to get wider and wider as people that can't afford it become more stigmatized. So it is interesting how that could pan out with the wealth side of things, but it's always been here.
Yeah, and the market will dictate what consumers want to do as well. And I think innovation, everything we've talked about today points to innovation in terms of thinking, innovation in brand thinking, innovation in actual R&D thinking, restaurant thinking, all of that stuff. So I think, if I was a CMO or a CEO, I'd be thinking, okay, at a broad level from an innovation perspective, what do we have to do and how do we get ourselves ready for some of this change? Culturally, let's just talk about culture for a moment. Johnny, question is why now, right? GLPs actually have been around for years. What's propelled them into the mainstream over the last 18 months, 2 years or so?
I think it's the fact that there's an obesity epidemic. So obesity rates worldwide have almost more than doubled since the 1990s. I think we're a lot more health conscious society as well. And then suddenly people have realized that these drugs, can work for more than diabetes. So I think it was already becoming a big issue. No country, I think, has ever managed to reduce their rate of obesity. So suddenly you've got something that can potentially solve that. And of course, that's creating a lot of hype.
Mm.
I also think, to build on that, consumers are taking more and more control of their health. I think COVID did a lot for that. We suddenly were all on our own. We were all trying to look after our own health the best way we knew how, whether that was wet wiping your groceries or taking vitamin C. We were doing our best, and it was kind of put a little bit on us because of that social distancing. And now there's an element of momentum from that. People want to continue some of that control, and this could give that for those who are affluent enough to be able to afford it themselves, or to work with the health providers to get that structure in place as well.
I think also the challenges we have on our national healthcare system, both in the US and the UK, I think is also another driving force behind this, because we know that obesity and diabetes are some of the leading causes of the pressure on the NHS. And so even from a government point of view, this is a solution. Or part of the solution.
Productivity as well.
To try and so it's actually also in their interest to accelerate the adoption.
Yeah, it's huge
I think that's one thing to watch, is if governments start to purposely accelerate because of the benefits on the national health systems, you might see adoption rates speed up or accessibility speed up. More than what we have anticipated in the past.
They're taking a very cautious approach at the moment, though. So while that could happen, it doesn't look like it at the moment.
But that's not true of the US.
No, US is going gung-ho straight ahead. They're the guinea pigs. Let's hope there are no nasty side effects.
But it becomes quite dystopian. You've got a drug, you've got your statins for your cholesterol, you've now got your GLP-1s for that. You're probably going to turn to some sort of fortified food to feed yourself. At some point, like you said earlier, with this joy of food, the emotion, we have to maintain that. Otherwise, you do run the risk of it all just becoming very clinical to manage your health,
Absolutely. And that's another reason. I wonder, would you want to lose that joy of food? Like, is it worth it? The cure.
Well, that's what a lot of people
worse than the illness.
I came off it because I just wasn't enjoying food anymore. I wasn't enjoying going out for dinner. I wasn't enjoying sitting with my family eating, So,
and it's a bonding, emotionally vital kind of experience. We've talked about, throughout humanity, it's been one of the glues.
Yeah.
So if you strip that away, that's going to potentially have some adverse kind of side effects.
And I think actually this leads to a wider health question about dieting and the diet culture, which is, I think so much has been focused, like you said, on calories in, calories out, get in a deficit, go to the gym. And actually, I think so much more probably needs to be focused on that emotional well-being, that mindful side to food, and for people to tap more closely into their fullness and their emptiness. That's the wrong word.
Just their satiety.
Their satiety, exactly, their satiety cues. And it's not something that I think we are as familiar with. We did it as children, but we've kind of forgotten it. And actually going back to those roots would be really helpful. And that's very much a public health messaging.
Say in the UK, we've always been like desk diners, saying food is fuel. You go to Italy, they will, in Spain, they will take a lunch break and properly enjoy their food. So I think there's a cultural aspect to that as well. But I doubt people are going to take more time with their food because life's speeding up. They're not getting any slower. I think AI is going to speed up society even more. So where do you find the time to slow down? Although I agree.
I'd love to hope that at a mealtime would be a great time to slow down. But
you'd like to hope so, yeah.
Just going back to what a point was made earlier, that infamous Kate Moss T-shirt, nothing tastes as good as skinny feels, right? that was a big kind of, I guess, cultural signal back in the 90s. You could argue that we are starting to see the first signs of progress from that point, the kind of body positivity movement, real beauty by Dove, strong not skinny, all of that stuff, that kind of culture current, which actually has been mainstream for the last 10 or 15 years. Obviously it's not quite as simple as that. It's not linear progress, but that has been in the cultural zeitgeist. If a pill can make you skinny, will the cultural pendulum swing in the other direction?
It's already swung. Yeah, we've gone right back to the 1990s. No wonder Oasis are back in. We've definitely gone back to that point. And, as much as people say, it's body positivity, that's all great. This has really exposed the fact that deep down people are desperate to be skinny.
Yeah, that T-shirt of Kate Moss's was not good, but kind of on the point. I don't think being skinny and thin is ever going to go away. And I think whatever anybody says about how happy they are with their body and everything else, I think there's very few that truly believe that. And I think a lot of them will always want to be slimmer. And, you see some big voices in that movement, like the singer Lizzo, now talking about GLP-1s. And that is quite sad because I felt like she was one of the biggest proponents of this. And, I think, again, you just got to be really careful. The media needs to stop putting pictures out there of before and after celebrities, because this is also driving it. They're not going to do it. They're going to keep doing it, right? And that's just the way it is. So, but how are people meant to make informed choices?
100%.
It's impossible.
But for me, from a cultural perspective, we've talked about joy and comfort and the happiness of eating and connection. Does that get trumped by the desire to look good and be skinny?
I think for a lot of people. Not everybody, though.
I was going to say, I think it's different strokes for different folks on this one. I think there'll always be the people who absolutely will want to be thin above all else and are prepared to. And I think there'll be people who really want to indulge and enjoy food. And I think this is going to be a really interesting way how it plays out, and why, yes, you need your food for function and to make sure people are getting the nutrients that they seek and need. But hopefully there's still room for those indulgent moments to make sure we are still connected.
Because it's getting people to enjoy food without excess, and that's often the problem. Is you can be a foodie, you can absolutely love food, but it's just trying to do it in the right way so you're not.
I think one of the big positives about GLP-1 is it could shift people away from ultra processed foods, because I think what they've done is kind of program people to eat very, very quickly because of the texture, because of the flavors. And I think they've kind of eroded listening to your body and listening to your body's signals. So I think that's a potential real positive.
And actually, to build on things like the complexity and flavor point we were making earlier, I think it actually gives that real opportunity to do things differently. I think you're absolutely right. I think having those moments that we can slow down, we can savor our food, we can enjoy it, that's where it opens up opportunities for food and drinks manufacturers to drive more complexity into their products, to have more levels of flavors, to have more textural differences, rather than just looking at how is this going to function, how is this going to deliver, and not necessarily optimizing, dare I say, to liking, but actually the whole brand perception, the whole proposition that you're looking for. A lot of the work we've done has been very liking and hedonic driven, but actually it's much more about that circumstance, the experience, the situation that people are exposed to these products in.
Jen, the point about a kind of cultural divide, culture currents moving in two different ways, and that body positivity idea should not go away, and it won't go away. But there is, as Johnny said, has the pendulum actually already swung back to kind of a view of skinny and wanting to have that kind of beach body ready, to cite another kind of cultural signal a few years ago. How do brands tread that line?
I think that there's something really important about staying true and authentic to your brand positioning and purpose. I think you need to be able to, as a brand, authentically engage in culture and engage on topics in a way that is authentic to what you stand for, and not just tread the latest trend because that's what everyone's talking about. The moment brands start to engage on topics that are not relevant to their products, not relevant to their brand positioning at all, which sometimes happens, you instantly lose credibility. And consumers are no longer interested in listening to brands that are in it just to make a quick buck. So the authenticity piece is really important. I think also when it comes to the culture around body image, I think right now in our social media society, we are so hyper fragmented that people are actually living in their own echo chambers. And while we might think that things are swinging in one direction because that's what the media are saying, actually individuals in their own social echo chambers and their own Instagram reels are following people that they're emotionally connecting to or are resonating with. And if I'm someone who is desperately looking for positive body images and positivity in my life, and I'm following a whole bunch of influencers in that space, that's the messaging I'm going to be receiving, even though the bigger trends, macro trends are changing in one way or the other. So I think making sure the brands stay on point, making sure that they're relevant and authentic to who and what they stand for is important, but also picking up in their communities when they want to engage on certain topics is really important.
And I guess to your point earlier, just don't stop listening to your consumer.
Stay close. And the more engaged you are with the fans, the more they will respond to you. And so even in the hyper fragmented marketing world that we're seeing now, brands are creating fan-based communities to engage with those consumers. And that's going to be the heartland of marketing in the future. You're going to have to engage with your consumers one-to-one based on what they know and create fan bases based on those topics and what they want to hear from you.
Last question here, and we probably will wrap up then. If we're going to take out of this session is going to be, what are the implications? If you're a CEO, CMO of a food and drink business in UK, US, global, what should you be thinking about is the question. And I guess not just thinking about, but what should you be doing? What we're going to do, we're going to go across all four and say, what is the one thing? What is the one biggest implication that you think will come of this? And a question really that underpins this is, how faddy is this? How dramatic is this really going to be? You've seen a huge amount of variation in the media. McKinsey put this as the number one thing that's going to impact food and drink. The press are all over it. Even airlines are talking about the profit they're going to make because they don't need to use as much fuel because people are lighter. I mean, I think we're a few years away from that potentially, but the implications and the ramifications are potentially huge. So Rob, starting with you, as we did the conversation, what do you think is the number one, the biggest implication that we're going to see come out of this movement?
I don't know about implication. I can only tell you what I would like to see. And that's that we don't end up with a niche category of foods. And that what we actually have is that we're normalizing small, nutrient-dense meals for everybody. That's what I would like to see.
Okay, Johnny?
I would say for brands, don't rush in, pause, don't buy into the media hype. This could be massive. It could also be quite niche. We don't know yet. Absolutely be ready, have your pipeline in place, but don't overreact.
Karen?
From my side, it's very much look at the opportunity rather than focus on the worries and think about how we can innovate to really deliver for consumers. I think, building off Johnny's point there, it could filter into nothing, but it still will be a very, very effective way to fuel a pipeline of innovation and make sure all brands stay relevant and with consumers at the heart, just like Jen said.
And Jen?
I would have two things. The first is double down on emotional branding now. Any emotional marketing or branding as a business, that is your gold dust. You need to double down with speed on that. And I think the second point would be know your consumer, predict when you think there's going to be a tipping point for your category, and have your innovation and pipeline ready, both from a technology point of view, but from a product and flavor and format point of view as well.
Almost based on numbers, right? Like based on your data.
And know when you're going to pull the trigger or when you choose not to pull the trigger, but be prepared for it. You don't want to be reacting to this. You want to proactively be ready to respond.
Thank you very much for everyone's input. I guess some of the takeouts that we're hearing and the general consensus seems to be wake up, doesn't it? It seems to be the this is happening. This is potentially very big. Don't just listen to the media. Look underneath at some of the real data, Johnny, that you talked about to understand the size and the growth of it, the differences between the UK and the US, what this might mean, not just across the industry, but across culture and society as well. I think there's some really big takeouts and very helpful, I hope, to some of the audience. But thank you guys for coming in and helping out.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for having us.
And of course, thank you for listening. I'm Jamie Holton. This is You, Me and CPG. And we'll see you next time.